Well, welcome everybody to another session here in the Medicine to Market Innovation Showcase. We're so glad to have you here. We're going to talk a little bit about the fixing the execution gap. But Eric Kubera, welcome. And I'm hoping that you'll help me do a recap of some of what our audience has experienced over the last day and a half.
Pleased to do so, Frank, and thank you for bringing us on for a recap of what we all know to be, who experienced it firsthand, was a very dynamic day. And I encourage those who registered but were busy to engage in the replays. So Frank and I are going to provide some nice fodder for you to consider to re-engage with our dynamic speakers from yesterday.
Yeah, so we encourage everybody to check out the Hop-In link. That's the online platform that we use that will get you access to some of the best of Reimagine sessions that we've got playing this afternoon. But importantly, you'll get access to all the replays and a few special Easter eggs, as they say, that are in the platform and that we'll be following up with. But maybe a couple quick highlights. So yesterday, Eric, you had a few really, really cool interviews. You did a great job. It was very interesting content. Maybe you could give folks a little bit of a preview, if they haven't seen it, what they're in store for when they watch the replay.
Yeah, so I was really focused yesterday on bringing some thought leaders and emerging technologies on the table, if you will, that really address the gap between what our healthcare professionals seem to want in the new hybrid model era, where hybrid being both live and virtual interactions seem to be the new normal that our customer-facing people need to get to. So our first guest, really, it was all about some emerging best practices and tools that actually empower your customer-facing teams to engage more effectively in this hybrid model that has become the new normal, and that a majority of HCPs with access actually, per the Q1 data that we cited yesterday, actually prefer. In fact, 41% of HCPs believe virtual is the most impactful way to engage with brand marketing, indication updates, etc. So that was kind of my executive level summary. Frank, what was yours?
I was fascinated with these pursuits that were helping to identify and bring forward that can really extend and deepen that customer experience. And if the last 50 months has taught us anything, is that some of the traditional methods that we've counted on to create that engagement were compromised. The outlook on them returning in both size and strength is quite uncertain. But what is very clear is that our customers, whether they're patients, payers, or providers, are willing to engage with brands, with salespeople, with organizations virtually, but it's got to be immersive. And so I was really interested in some of the sessions we were talking about ways to leverage technology that are perhaps more immersive and more, frankly, accessible than what I recall in my 20-something years at 7 different biopharmas. Do you feel the same?
Oh my gosh, great call out. Because one of the amazing and ironic insights from yesterday, particularly in the second session with our friends from Tipping Point Media, is I find it almost deliciously ironic that these virtual technologies, these augmented reality and virtual reality, it's actually emerging as a tool for, if you look at it, our customer-facing humans, right? It's actually helping them develop a more intimate relationship with the brand. And it's also helping, and to me, that the moving thing about it was it's actually a new tool to help us get the HCPs and our customer facing teams to actually empathize more with the patients by putting the providers who treat disease and the life science professionals who are trying to promote these, and it's really it's sort of like giving life science companies a tool that can really help them you know make patient centricity more than like a bumper sticker, more than a slogan. It's going to help us, potentially. You got to find the right fit, right? To walk the walk, because I've heard nothing but, and I think it's a great message. It's all about the patient centricity. Okay. Saying it is just saying it. Those are words.
Right.
And there's a Latin saying, acta non verba, which means action, not words. We need to find ways to put some of these mantras that life science companies are famous for putting out there, and they're well-intentioned. Let's put them into action. That's why we host these conferences. That's why we do these summits.
I couldn't agree more. We put a lot of effort into these. We want folks to be successful. We're really passionate about the patient side of this, because where there are challenges and there are gaps with delivering and delighting for customers, it's going to be patients that are left behind if we don't execute at the highest level. And these technologies are really aimed to help us go ahead and do that. I thought we had some really cool conversations about using technology, of course, in the practical virtual or face-to-face interactions with providers by medical affairs teams or sales teams. I think that's really slick. There's a dominant theme here with these sessions, which is we need to turn data into insights. That's for sure. With everything that we're doing, we're analyzing. But what we do needs to be, to your point, patient-centric, physician-centric, customer-centric. And as Paul Marasco pointed out in the opening session, there's quite an opportunity to change the pharma model and get away from NPP, non-personal promotion, and think about new personal promotion. There's a pursuit for tailored experiences that we need to be seeking out so we can ultimately perform. So on that note, let's talk a little bit about performance and filling this execution gap. We've got, I think, a fun slide to show to everybody here. And it kind of represents a bit of the gap that we've heard over the last few summits, over the last 50 hours of sessions that we've had here in the last year. There is this gap. And to some degree, and with some brands, it really is widening, and it's changing the leaderboard when it comes to brand, especially in some competitive classes. And Eric, you did this analogy that I think we can all understand, whether we're in clinical development or frontline sales, finance, or folks that are working in marketing around this Netflix versus Blockbuster model. Can you explain that to us?
Yes, I mean, it's just the reality of, look what happened to Blockbuster. They were a 9-to-5 outfit, right? You had to be there during working hours. And, for years, they were a multi-billion-dollar, industry that was delivering the goods. But ultimately, they were replaced by a model that plays on an infinite clock, where customers have access to the tools and resources that they need when they need it. Okay. And so much of society is moving to this on demand. It's pretty clear. The winners and losers in biopharma are going to be able to meet their customers when they want to meet them on their terms. And that's the reality. And that's going to be the challenge of this so-called, these catchphrases drive me a little nuts. Like digital, people think you say the word that you are becoming the word. No, it's actually going to take an approach and a mindset, a growth mindset, being open to new and emerging technologies that make it easier for us to connect with the customer. People talk about the commercial value proposition. They talk about having people in place, fulfilling functions. But let's be real, folks. The people who hold the keys in pharma and medtech is the HCP making the decision, right? So it's our obligation, not theirs, to meet them where they're at. This inside out marketing that's been the normal, and by the way, getting it done for many years, just the same way Blockbuster got it done for many years. Okay, it's being replaced, and the customer is calling the shots, and the winners and losers are going to be determined by those who are able to be bold enough to make the next best move to meet their customers where they are.
The infinite clock idea is something that we've been talking about a lot more lately. And I feel like we're going to have to continue this narrative. People need to understand that very, very clearly as we think about brand engagement or disease state awareness or anything that engages a patient, payer, provider. The consumption of information and the desire to engage with experiences, not just information, truly is on an infinite clock. And I feel like that is going to present some challenges for organizations that decide that they don't want to fully invest in being there for those customers across the infinite clock. Let me give you an example. Being able to truly interact with providers during our more traditional workday. Think about the time zones that you're in, and if that's kind of like 8 to 5 for majority of your field-facing personnel, are you going to lose competitive advantage because the other brands realizes that they can have experiences that truly deliver and delight when providers need to see and interact with that brand at 5 a.m., at 10 p.m., who knows, but it's an infinite clock and we have to adjust appropriately. Some of the traditional models that we've seen in some organizations from 10 years ago, they will lose their foothold for sure if they don't change. But we don't want to create too much gloom and doom here, but we do want to be clear about the stakes. So the Blockbuster, the Netflix thing, this gap that we've described, we want to make it tangible for everybody. So, let's share something with you. What are some of the stakes at hand here? And right now, based on some current research, over $31 billion of promotionally sensitive brands are at risk of failing over the next few years. How did this number derived? Well, one of the largest consulting organizations that looks at the life sciences industry looked at brands that are known to be promotionally sensitive. With so many of the sales efforts being sidelined for so much of the pandemic, as well as the gap that was created when there were virtual interactions and not necessarily turning into prescribing, the revenue lost and the potential impact of future revenues that are lost because it's going to take a while, if ever, for these sales and marketing efforts to return to their previous level of impact. The point here is that a lot of money is at stake. And why is that? So we've got this kind of like hearing, diagnosing, seeing concept. Eric, why don't you walk us through that?
Well, I mean, the whole idea of customers not being able to hear, it's because of all the white noise out there. And it's one of the topics, and Frank, we were talking about this yesterday, actually in one of our sessions. I call it the innovator's dilemma. So we've got this amazing renaissance taking place in the life sciences, biopharma and medtech. There's so much new things developing and there's so much growth, and it's happening so fast. But right along with biopharma, in the service provider sector, and this, by the way, I only discovered this after I had to step off my 20-year run in biopharma. Once I had to step off that hamster wheel to even notice this one. But the service provider sector, which powers biopharma, is also having this amazing technological renaissance. And we had one of the sort of Da Vinci creators yesterday in the virtual and augmented reality kind of share with us some of these developments. The challenge is this: there's so much growth and change. It's hard to see. It's hard to hear and experience the forest for the trees. So what happens? This paralysis almost with all of this change, it makes it difficult for HCPs to diagnose. Some of the data that emerged from the IQVIA research, or I think it might have been Sarepta, that telehealth engagements are not serving new patient starts. They're not helping patients with unmet needs get started on new medicine, theoretically, that they would need to be started if they were in an actual live appointment. So HCPs are struggling to diagnose in this environment because they're not used to it. This is sort of an emerging thing, right? So biopharma and life sciences, we need to close that gap. And the last part is pharmas have more data. We were talking about that yesterday as well.
Yeah.
Is you get all this data and you're sort of all dressed up with nowhere to go, because it's really hard to sort of, okay, great, you have this data. Well, you're going to need some support, whether it's with AI or one of the platforms we had yesterday that we shared with Arsenal Nation, kind of basically made it clear that they can provide some data insights in real time. So marketing and brand teams can actually course adjust before by the time the quarter's over and you've had all your meetings trying to collate and put this data together to find out which brand materials are working, which aren't. So I think those are kind of the three areas that this, boom, this renaissance in innovation, like we kind of need to close these gaps, and it's going to be a huge challenge.
And there's a huge reward on the other side of it, because as we say here, pharmaceutical, size and strength no longer matter in the ways that they did previously, because of this pursuit of immersive, highly tailored, infinite clock experiences that we can deliver to our customers. And so to kind of like cap off the stakes on the brand side of it, as you were describing, Eric, with HCPs struggling to diagnose, pharma having a struggle trying to capture the attentions because it's such a noisy market. So new to brand, NBRX, if you're familiar with it, being in the biopharma industry in particular, new patients are not being introduced to new brands the way they were. And this is year over year, 2019, 2020, it was down 11%. That's pretty significant for a lot of reasons. Even if you have a different situation at your company, industries are always focused on growing. Mm-hmm. And so regardless of where your company sits, you're a part of an industry that had a bit of a falling off a cliff when it came to many, many new brands. And without calling out the companies, launches were really, really hard. But on the other side of all of this, it's not just about the organizations and revenue and performance reviews and bonuses and all that sort of jazz. They are important, but they pale in the importance of what this means to patients who are, in fact, in need. Do you agree, Eric?
Frank, I think you nailed it, because when you look at these numbers, I used to tell my team, I said, I don't like new brand, starts. Let's call it new to patient starts. Okay. Because ultimately that's what new to brand is. I used to like that. I don't want to hear NBRX. It's new patient starts. We used to talk about new patient starts and what, a privilege it is, to be part of that journey to help meet unmet needs. Mm-hmm. So Frank, we hit on this too the other day. That gap in Q1 shocked many of us. Okay, you had companies that hadn't missed on earnings and projection, earnings per share and projection in a long time. And the reason why was they were expecting by Q1 with the return to the field that 11% miss of patients with unmet needs. You can't tell me that the unmet needs went down 11% when we were quarantined during the pandemic, right? So I think that's the sort of fire bell in the night that went down in Q1, and that's why we called this summit. This is off our schedule. That's why we called this summit, is to raise awareness that these are the core defects at work that are driving this gap, and it's really time for pharma executives to, bring their head up a little bit and begin to look externally for some things that are going down on the outside that can help them close that gap moving forward.
You're completely right. And by us having this summit in June where we didn't expect it, it's because if you're wondering why, here's what the community said. These are our peers. We had an outpouring of requests for continuing to bring out the best ideas, the best people, the best innovations to this community that we feel so close to. As for Eric and I both have spent a couple decades each in pharma and biotech. We feel very passionate about the challenges that our peers face at organizations, and we want to elevate them all. And what's happened so far, which called this summit forward, was where 2020 and the pandemic changed everything as far as resetting the forecast, resetting expectations. Virtually all publicly traded biopharma companies in 2020, once the pandemic hit, repealed their annual guidance. Some brought it back towards the end of the year, but they pretty much all said that they're not committing to their original 2020 revenue guidance numbers. So it was a giant reset for everybody. Okay, not a get out of jail free card, but certainly an upheaval that the industry had to respond to. And so what did so many organizations do? Everyone started piloting new activities. And that's led us to this big pile on of data and insights. Like, what does this mean? We're data rich, or we knowledge poor? But if 2020's P word was pilot, 2021's P word had to be performance. And to your point, Eric, about Q1, the number of companies that did two things. They reported that earnings were off for Q1. The number of misses was epic. And those are the financial analysts saying that. That's not us. The other problem was that the number of executives who went on those earnings calls and said, hey, by the way, the commercial recovery is not happening the way we expected. The clinical recovery of trials restarting, gaining momentum has not gone the way we expected, was truly epic. It's just really unbelievable in how much we saw that. And so that's why we're having this conversation. So clearly there is an execution gap. There is a performance gap that we need to find ways to fill in. So the question becomes, what's inside this gap that people should be looking for? And it's really made up of two things: capabilities and alignment. And when we say capabilities, what we mean is that for your brand specifically, no matter where you are in the life cycle or the commercialization path, do you have absolutely the right capabilities to get the job done? So while we've talked a lot about innovations that bring forth new capabilities, really ambitious leaders in biopharma and medtech are asking the question, with the current capabilities that we have, either things that we have built ourselves or partners that we've brought forward, technology that we've installed, are they the best for us? Not just the best offering because we want to stick with this vendor and we'll take this additional offering, but do we have the absolute best capabilities to deliver, to delight, to make sure that there is a minimal gap between the potential of what this brand can do and the actual performance or number of patients that we're serving? How we minimize that? Do we have those capabilities? But then there's the flip side of it, which is, while you've got capabilities, is everyone involved in that aligned to what their role is in fulfilling the brand vision, to leveraging that capability, to getting the job done? the optimization that can be done by making sure everyone involved understands the vision, the promise, their role, and how the whole thing works is critical. We can't have silos. We can't be uncertain that we are aligned to what needs to be done. So the capabilities in alignment. And so that's a lot, and there's high stakes, and it's hard. So let's talk a little bit about why it's so hard to deal with this gap. And by the way, if this wasn't hard, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because Q1 would have been a lot different for so many companies. So let's talk a little bit about why that is hard to figure out how to fill that gap. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but here are kind of the top three. Eric, do you want to take them?
Yeah, I mean, reason number one is we can't clone you, right? We don't have that technology just yet. So if you had the time to constantly scan the market for the latest solutions, you would. Okay. The other challenge is being able to see through the numbers. Isolating individual results in a multifactorial world is incredibly complex, and everyone is locked into their work remit, internally. So it's just really hard to get that insight that you need. And here's the third piece, is the unbiased truth, a clear-eyed, objective assessment of reality. That is really hard to do with internal politics and internal vendor bias. People have been there for a while telling you, hey, we've got an offering, we can cover this, just give it to us. Well, that's also locked into internal politics and internal bias.
It's really hard to do. When we're going 1,000 miles an hour, I can relate to this so many times in my career. It's sometimes you wish you could clone yourself because the workload is so great. So it's okay. These things are hard. But if we could get you right now watching this to be able to do 15 times more workload, just imagine what the world would look like. But it's not realistic. So these things are hard, and we're very empathetic.
Frank, let me just insert that. Listen, it takes guts to peel back the onion, and take a look. I had one doctor used to tell me, he was like, it's hard to listen sometimes because you're terrified you might learn something that you have to take action on that you didn't see before. And I love this guy. I hope he's watching because I invited him. But that was one insight, and he was right. And it really made me stop and think. And I'll be the first guy to tell you, when I was on my 20-year hamster wheel run in biopharma, I was actually that guy. I did not love, and I experienced it both on the sales side at a small biotech, and then as a manager at a larger company, having to fill out these surveys, working with some of these vendors that were trying to get a feel, for, strategic alignment and things like that. But I've come to realize that there's extraordinary value in understanding, what's happening outside the company narrative.
It is hard. When it comes to evaluating external capabilities, what do we always do? Well, maybe we put together a task force to have a bunch of partners kind of come in, and we try to kind of figure it out and get a feel for things. We create some sort of elaborate, RFP process and make people, run back and forth with revisions and updates and, hey, change this, and, creeping scope of work. Or we send procurement to go ahead and find us a few of the partners that might be able to help our brand in some way. But you feel for procurement, how are they supposed to go from sourcing, reams of paper for the office and then evaluate market research firms kind of like next? They're incredible people, but this is like, if everything is on the line, then you'd probably want to do it yourself to make sure you absolutely kind of like get it right. You would never assign it to someone who doesn't have complete and total focus on that specific subject when it comes to those capabilities. And on the internal side, when it comes to capabilities. Let's face it, someone brought this stuff in, someone's responsible for the budget. Things can get very defensive when you start saying, hey, I just want to do an objective assessment of our capabilities. People tend to hold on and sometimes defend. And it all depends on the health of the culture of your company. And we know that's highly variable. And from an alignment perspective, what do? Leaders always feel that their teams are aligned, and certainly they're continuously improving, but surveys don't pull this stuff off. At some point, to think about the execution gap and capabilities and alignment, it's like, who's an expert in this, who's done it 1,000 times, that can just give us, clear-eyed counsel on getting it done. It's worth doing. But the question becomes, no matter what role you're in, how do you know if you've got a performance or execution gap? So, Eric, when you think about, sales leadership, how would a sales leader know if there's some sort of execution or performance gap between potential and actual that they might be subject to right now? How do you know?
I think the most obvious thing that, at least from a salesperson out there, is you're not hitting your performance. your paycheck, quite frankly, isn't what it used to be. Mm-hmm. So something in those situations is amiss. Excuse me.
Yeah, of course.
But to me, that's the most obvious thing. The more subtle thing that's happening is the message simply isn't sticking, or there's some sort of, gap, and then a very kind of slow but subtle erosion of morale too. And that's where things kind of get dangerous, because people are working their tails off and not getting the results that they were getting. And so there's some sort of gap that's operating beneath the surface, and it's sort of sometimes hard to see internally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's hard. When I think the bonus thing's a great example. If you're in market access and you've got 85% favorable coverage, but you've got a truly superior product, you believe that in your heart of hearts, yet your competitors also have 85% favorable coverage, there isn't much of a delta. If you're in marketing and you're in this constant bidding war to get attention, you feel that more patients should be signing up for your unbranded campaign. People don't return to your website. Just identify one of the initiatives that's important to you, where you can't either figure out if this is working, or you've got tangible things in front of you and there's a gap to your goal. Then there is an execution and performance gap that's worth looking at. But you can ultimately fill it in. But the things that we often do, we throw another pilot opportunity or a task force, like I said before. There's a lot of common ways to fail. It's important to start looking outside for other examples. And part of a second innovator's dilemma that I would share are organizations that talk about being innovative, yet all they do is obsess over where they fit in the middle of benchmarks. So that if you're saying you're an innovator, but you're acting only on benchmarks, you are going to suffer the tyranny of average. And you're just hanging out in the bell curve. And so with these high stakes, we want to kind of minimize that gap. And that gap is clearly possible to do that. So Eric, I would
just add one thing, Frank. Sure. Is that every breakout in performance that I can remember that I was part of involved some sort of new insight into what was not working, that once that understanding was there, or just even, it was not always a grand thing, actually. It was usually one small nugget or gap that was addressed, that the good people of the life science industry and some of these companies I was with put into action and delivered amazing results in relatively short time. So we're not talking about necessarily a comprehensive, deep dive. It's sort of a curated examination of a couple areas to explore where the leadership already feels not that something's amiss, but that something might be missing.
That's powerful. Ultimately, the heroes of this industry are going to be leaders that obsess about making sure that they know, not guess, know and can quantify what's involved in the gap that they have between their potential and their realized performance. And as we mentioned in previous sessions, this is playing into that common real estate transaction analogy. When you think about the sale of a property, you've got the buyer's perspective and you get the seller's perspective. And they're each going to be rooting for price to go in a certain direction. And so for these transactions ultimately to be successful, it's really helpful. It may not solve the transaction consternation. It may not necessarily push the deal through every time, but a basis for optimizing the probability that the transaction will occur is to bring in an unbiased third party that in real estate they call an appraiser to help give an independent opinion of value. And this, when it comes to the execution gap of capabilities and alignment, for those that are really obsessed of making sure that all their SG&A funds are appropriately resourced. When you think about some companies that are spending 50, 100, $500 million per quarter on selling and general administrative expenses, what percentage is not optimized? Great leaders are obsessed with, if I'm not sure that I know all of those dollars are optimized, oh, by the way, and performance isn't where it needs to be, then I need to get objective, clear-eyed counsel, which is, frankly, an introduction to the life science practice that Eric is running. So while we'll talk about the practice in a second, Eric, what's up with the owl?
Well, funny you should ask. I mean, Frank, that's the life science owl. So I'm actually one of those dads who has all of his kids' artwork in his office. And my daughter Reagan made this etching on black slate of an owl. And Frank, you kept telling me right when I started my journey with Arsenal, it's like we offer clear-eyed counsel. And I remembered looking up, and the owl was looking back at me. And I said, you know what? I just discovered the life science owl. So, and that's what this is all about. I want to bring the owl. She's going to be perched on my shoulder wherever I go with whatever biopharma company that I help in their mission to deliver better for patients.
Well, it's fantastic. I love it, and congratulations to her. It's absolutely phenomenal, and we're proud to have that as a gift to Arsenal Nation to remind them of what the practice is doing. So let's talk about exactly that. What are the benefits of your practice in helping organizations identify, understand, and assess their performance and execution gaps?
Well, I think once you really once I understand your core areas, I mean, I also want to be transparent. We're a boutique, business here. So we're really part one and step one is going to be understand the 1 to 2 core areas that you want our life science practice to examine objectively, to understand current capabilities, and also to understand perhaps some of the unmet needs or desires of whether it's your customer facing sales force, et cetera. So once we get a clear-eyed assessment of those core areas, then we're also able, and we're able to do a lot of this concomitantly, is with all the innovation out there, and the core mission of Arsenal Advisors from day one is connecting the people and ideas and best practices, transforming healthcare in real time. And so that's the other piece, is connecting, our life science clients to those ideas that are aligned with their very specific interests and focus. So that's it essentially in a nutshell. Frank, did I miss anything? Do you have anything to add?
I think that what's very powerful about what you're doing, Eric, is you're taking and drawing upon many things. The first is that Arsenal has arguably the largest life science executive community and following of any non-media organization that's out there. This is a community of peers, and the intelligence, the best practices, the influence that this community, that frankly we feel is an asset for our organization, is incredibly powerful. To be able to tap into the minds and the voices of these incredible executives in biopharma and medtech has helped us bring insights and best practices forward to the community, which through summits like this, we generously share with everyone. It gives us a great opportunity to assess exactly what's going on there. So beyond benchmarking reports and other subscription services, we've got a real-time assessment of exactly what's going on across the industry, where we're able to pick up the peaks and the valleys of initiatives that are and are not working, and be able to translate that information back to biopharma clients. And extremely importantly here is that our constant scanning of the market for partners and practices that can best serve the life sciences industry allows us to bring forward not only an assessment of existing capabilities of a biopharma or medtech organization, but to be immersed in identifying and knowing the innovators that are out there that could be more, I would say, optimal partners for the specific use case. And this is all driven by a series of executives here that come from biopharma that have done this, that have done it more than once and have done it 1,000 times. Not that we're going to go ahead and add up the years, but come in with the strength, as you've outlined, of kind of that objective third party. We don't have an incentive to promote partners or capabilities that are either heritage that someone internally is rooting for, or externally that another organization wants to go ahead and promote. We're objective about that, and agnostic, if you will. And then from an alignment standpoint, we come in and help, again, from that third-party perspective, being able to survey the industry, but zero in specifically on the use case and help inform the organization of, is everyone aligned? And do they understand the mission? Are they clear on their role in executing on that? And what are the barriers or opportunities that they've identified that would get in the way of fulfilling, for example, the brand vision, are things that we would go ahead and bring forward. And so while the organization's trying to bring innovation to life, the life science practice specifically, Eric, I'm very proud of what you're doing, is trying to bring performance to life so we minimize that execution gap.
That is what it's all about. And if there's two words, of course, the linguist in me cannot resist, that sums it up, of the mindset of the people that we're aspiring to partner with in this important endeavor, is sapere aude, which means dare to know. Mm-hmm. So everyone that's on this broadcast right now, you're demonstrating that sapere aude. You're looking outside of the castle walls at these amazing and emerging technologies, people, and ideas that have the potential to turn around or simply make a difference in performance, which ultimately lands on the patient. And we are all patients. And what you do is so important. It is just an absolute honor and privilege, to have an opportunity to help serve in that endeavor, which we are all a part of.
Wise comments. Okay, so on that note, our call to action for you, our medtech and biopharma peers, would be is, whether it's your position, whether it's your project, whether it's your brand, if there is a gap between what you believe is possible and the actual results that you're seeing, right down to that micro, it doesn't need to be macro, we encourage you to reach out to Eric. You can go to arsenaladvisors.com to go ahead and learn more, connect with him on social media. But we want to make sure that brands fulfill their potential, because at some point we are all patients. It's important for us to root for each other and make sure we can deliver the value to patients in need. So, Eric, as we wrap up this session, we want to direct people to the Hop-In platform, the replays, the expo, all of that sort of stuff. What do we want to do for the rest of today, but also get access to what's coming up?
Well, I just encourage everyone to watch some exciting sessions today, and to follow up with any of the interesting people that might make a difference or for your organization. And let's stay in touch and show up better the next week.
Absolutely. So everyone, definitely check out the Hop-In platform for the rest of the sessions that are going on today. You'll get access to the replays as well. We've got another summit coming up at the beginning of September that's going to be focused on brand breakthroughs. So Medicine to Market is going from the Innovation Showcase to brand breakthroughs. So that's going to be a lot of fun, some very, very cool things. And if you want to get in early on that, please go to the reception area on the Hop-In Summit platform, and you'll see the link to be able to sign up for that. We're going to have a bunch of live streams for our community between now and then, and be sure to check out arsenaladvisors.com and get our AI-driven newsletter, where we'll be sharing regular highlights across the industry, but also insights, benchmarks, best practices as this community continues to embrace itself to go ahead and innovate and perform. So on behalf of Eric Gubera and me, I'm Frank Dolan. Thanks for joining us in this session, and we'll see you soon.